The photograph is small, no larger than a calling card. It was taken in the autumn of 1895, in a studio on Morrow Lane, in the mill town of Ashworth, Lancashire. The photographer was a man named Cecil Hargrove. He operated a modest portrait studio above a haberdasher's shop. The image shows a woman. She is seated in a high-backed chair, dressed in dark taffeta, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her expression is composed, almost serene. The lighting is typical of the period. Soft diffusion from a north-facing window. A painted backdrop of a pastoral scene behind her. A fern in a brass pot to her left. Everything about the photograph is ordinary, until you look at her hands. Her left hand is clearly defined, every finger, every knuckle, the thin band of a silver ring on her fourth finger. But her right hand is not there. Not blurred, as it would be if she had moved during the exposure. Not hidden beneath fabric. The hand simply is not present. You can see the dark taffeta of her skirt directly through the space where her fingers should rest, as though the hand were made of glass, or as though it had never existed at all. Cecil Hargrove noted this anomaly in his studio ledger. He wrote, and I will read his words precisely as they were recorded. Plate developed true. No defect in the emulsion. No fog. The lady's right hand did not take. I cannot account for it. He underlined the word cannot twice. The woman in the photograph is Eleanor Blythe, and this image, now held in the restricted archive of the Ashworth Municipal Historical Society, is the last known likeness of her. It is also, by every credible account, the beginning of something that has never been adequately explained. Something unsettling, something meticulously documented, and something that, even now, resists every rational framework we attempt to place around it. Let me take you back. 1895, the tail end of the Victorian Age. England was a nation suspended between convictions, between the old certainties of empire and faith, and the new, colder certainties of science and industry. In Lancashire, the air smelled of coal smoke and wet wool. The mills ran 6 days a week. The River Colne, which wound through Ashworth, carried a permanent film of dye runoff, turning it shades of indigo and ochre depending on the day's production. The streets smelled of horse dung and carbolic soap, of tallow candles, and the sharp, metallic tang of gaslight. This was a world that believed profoundly in the visible, in the measurable, in the material. And yet it was also a world riddled with anxieties about what could not be seen. Germ theory was still relatively new. Pasteur's work was barely 2 decades old. The idea that invisible organisms could kill you, that the air itself could carry death, had fundamentally shaken the Victorian mind. If disease was invisible, what else might be? Photography, too, had introduced its own unsettling questions. The camera was understood to be objective. A mechanical eye, it recorded what was there. And so when a photograph showed something that should not be there, or failed to show something that should, it created a particular kind of dread. Not superstitious dread, empirical dread. The dread of a man who trusts his instruments and finds them telling him something impossible. Medicine in 1895 was advancing rapidly, but remained, in many ways, primitive. X-rays would not be discovered by Röntgen until November of that very year. Physicians still relied heavily on palpation, auscultation, and direct observation. The stethoscope was their most sophisticated diagnostic tool. Blood pressure measurement was in its infancy. The sphygmograph, a crude device for recording pulse waveforms on smoked paper, was considered cutting edge. Neurology was a young discipline. Charcot had died only 2 years earlier. Hysteria was the catch-all diagnosis for any female affliction that defied easy categorization. And yet, the physicians who examined Eleanor Blythe didn't use that word. Not once. Not in any of the surviving records. They used a different word. They used the word inexplicable. Eleanor Blythe was born Eleanor Maud Ashford in 1868 in the village of Thornham, 3 miles east of Ashworth. Her father, George Ashford, was a clerk at the Thornham Savings Bank. Her mother, Constance, kept the household and took in mending. They were respectable, unremarkable. Church on Sundays, meat on Thursdays, a small garden with runner beans and marigolds. Eleanor was educated at the Thornham Parish School until the age of 14, at which point she entered domestic service as a parlor maid at Grieve Hall, the home of the Whitworth family. She was, by all accounts, diligent, quiet, particular about small things. She kept her own shoes polished to a mirror shine. She aligned the cutlery on the dining table with geometric precision. Mrs. Agnes Whitworth noted in a letter to her sister that Eleanor was meticulous in her habits, almost to the point of peculiarity, but never disagreeable. In 1891, at the age of 23, Eleanor married Thomas Blythe, a foreman at the Ashworth Spinning Company. Thomas was 7 years her senior, a solid man, broad-shouldered, known for his steady temperament and his fondness for cricket. They took a terraced house at 14 Croft Street, Ashworth. They had no children. Eleanor kept the house immaculate. She was known to scrub the front step every morning, even in winter. She attended St. Cuthbert's Church. She was a member of the Ladies' Charitable Sewing Circle. She made excellent shortbread. There was nothing about Eleanor Blythe that suggested she would become the subject of one of the most disturbing case files in late Victorian medical history. Nothing at all. She was ordinary. Ordinary in the way that makes what happened to her so much worse. Because the ordinary do not expect to be chosen. And whatever chose Eleanor Blythe did so without warning, without explanation, and without mercy. The first anomaly was observed on the 17th of June, 1895. It was a Monday. Eleanor had visited the surgery of Dr. Hadrian Locke, a general practitioner with rooms on Bridge Street, Ashworth. She had come to consult him about a persistent numbness in the fingers of her right hand. She described it as a sensation of absence, not tingling, not pain. Absence. As though the fingers were still there, but had somehow become disconnected from the fact of their own existence. Dr. Locke examined her hand thoroughly. He noted full range of motion in all digits, normal grip strength, no discoloration, no swelling. Capillary refill was normal. He pricked each fingertip with a pin. She responded to every prick. She felt pain, and yet she insisted that the hand did not feel like her own. Dr. Locke recorded his initial impression in his case notes. He wrote, "Mrs. Blythe presents with a complaint of somatic alienation in the right hand. No objective findings on examination. Neurological function intact. Suggests the condition may be functional in origin." Functional, the polite Victorian term for "it's in your head." But then something happened that changed Dr. Locke's assessment entirely. During the examination, as Eleanor held her right hand up for inspection, Dr. Locke reached for a magnifying lens on his desk. He looked away from her hand for no more than 3 seconds. When he looked back, the tip of her right index finger was transparent. Not pale, not bloodless. Transparent. He could see the dark wood of the examination table through the flesh of her fingertip. He blinked. He adjusted his lens. He brought a candle closer. The transparency remained for approximately 11 seconds. He counted. He was a precise man. Then gradually, the finger solidified again. The flesh returned to its normal opacity. The color came back, pink and warm and entirely human. Eleanor had not noticed. She was looking at the wall. Dr. Locke set down his lens. He sat very still for a long moment. And then he wrote a single additional line in his case notes. a line that would later be cited in every subsequent medical report on Eleanor Blythe. He wrote, "I observed a transient loss of optical substance in the distal phalanx of the right index finger. Duration approximately 11 seconds. I have no explanation. I do not believe I was mistaken." Dr. Hadrian Locke was 61 years old. He had practiced medicine for 37 years. He had served as a field surgeon in the Anglo-Zulu War. He was not a man given to fantasy. He was not mistaken. Over the following weeks, the condition progressed, and it was meticulously documented, not by one physician, but by 4. Dr. Locke, alarmed by what he had witnessed, referred Eleanor to Dr. Phineas Cranach, a neurologist affiliated with the Manchester Royal Infirmary. Dr. Cranach examined Eleanor on the 29th of June. By this time, the transparency had spread. The entire right hand, from fingertips to wrist, was now subject to intermittent episodes of what Cranach termed corporeal translucence. The episodes lasted longer now. 20 seconds. 30. Sometimes a full minute. During these episodes, the hand could still be felt. If you reached out and grasped it, you would feel warm skin, solid bone, the pulse of blood in the radial artery. But you could see through it, as though the hand existed in one sense but not another, as though the body had begun to disagree with itself about whether it was there. Dr. Cranach conducted a series of tests. He measured Eleanor's pulse during the episodes using a Dudgeon sphygmograph. The tracings, which survive in the Cranach family papers, show a resting pulse of 72 beats per minute during normal periods. During episodes of translucence, the pulse dropped, not dramatically, but measurably, to 64, then 58. Then, during one prolonged episode on the 4th of July, to 49, as though her body were slowing down, retreating from its own physicality. Cranach also tested her reflexes. Patellar reflexes remained normal. Pupillary response was normal. Sensation was intact in all areas, including the transparent regions. He could find no neurological deficit, no lesion, no palsy, no sign of any known disease. On the 12th of July, Father Matthias Dunn, the parish priest of St. Cuthbert's, visited Eleanor at her home on Croft Street. He had heard rumors. The sewing circle had been talking. Father Dunn was an educated man, a graduate of Ushaw College, and he approached the visit with what he later described as pastoral skepticism. He stayed for 40 minutes. During that time, he witnessed an episode in which Eleanor's entire right forearm, from elbow to fingertip, became fully transparent for approximately 2 minutes and 15 seconds. He could see the pattern of the wallpaper behind her arm. He could see the arm of the chair she was sitting in, visible through what should have been solid flesh and bone. He reached out and touched her forearm. It was there, warm, solid. He could feel the fine hairs on her skin, but he could not see them. Father Dunn provided a sworn written testimony to Dr. Locke. In it, he stated, "I am not a man of science, but I'm a man of sound mind and clear sight." What I witnessed in the home of Mrs. Eleanor Blythe defies every natural law I understand. I do not attribute it to the demonic. I do not attribute it to the divine. I attribute it to nothing, because I have no framework within which to place it. By late July, the translucence had spread to Eleanor's right shoulder. By early August, it had crossed to the left hand. Thomas Blythe, her husband, gave a statement to Dr. Cranach on the 9th of August. His voice, as transcribed by Cranach's secretary, was flat, controlled. He said, "I can hold her hand and feel her there. But when I look down, I see my own fingers closed around nothing. It is the most terrible thing I have ever known. Not because it frightens me, but because she looks at me and asks if she is still real. And I do not know what to tell her." On the 15th of August, Dr. Cranach invited 2 additional physicians to examine Eleanor. Dr. Oswald Fenwick, a specialist in disorders of the peripheral nervous system, and Dr. Alistair Vane Houghton, a consulting physician with an interest in rare dermatological conditions. Both men examined Eleanor independently. Both men witnessed episodes of translucence. Both men signed affidavits confirming what they had seen. Dr. Fenwick attempted to measure the optical properties of the affected tissue using a simple photometric apparatus. He placed a candle behind Eleanor's transparent forearm and measured the light transmission with a selenium photocell. The results were consistent. During episodes, the affected tissue transmitted approximately 87% of incident light. Normal human tissue transmits less than 2%, 87%. Her arm was nearly as transparent as window glass, and yet it was still there, still warm, still alive, still her. Dr. Vane Houghton attempted a different approach. He drew a small sample of blood from Eleanor's left arm during an episode of translucence. The blood, once drawn into the syringe, was perfectly normal. Red, opaque, warm. But as it left her body, he observed something that he described as, and I quote, profoundly disturbing. The blood became visible at the precise moment it exited the vein. Inside her body, it had been invisible. Outside, it was not. As though the transparency was a property not of the tissue itself, but of Eleanor, of her body as a system, of her existence as a coherent physical entity. Something was happening to Eleanor Blythe that had no name, no precedent, no mechanism. She wasn't ill. She wasn't dying. She was disappearing. On the 3rd of September, 1895, Cecil Hargrove was commissioned to take a formal photographic portrait of Eleanor. The commission came from Dr. Cranach, who wished to create a permanent visual record of the phenomenon. It was to be the definitive documentation, the irrefutable proof. Eleanor arrived at the studio on Morrow Lane at 2:30 in the afternoon. She was accompanied by Thomas, by Dr. Locke, and by Dr. Cranach. By this point, the translucence had spread to most of her right side. Her right arm, her right shoulder, portions of her right torso, and her right leg below the knee were all subject to prolonged episodes. Hargrove prepared a wet collodion plate. The exposure time would be approximately 8 seconds. Eleanor sat in the chair. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the camera. Hargrove removed the lens cap. He counted. 1, 2, 3. At the count of 4, Dr. Locke, who was standing to the side of the camera, made a small, involuntary sound, a gasp, or perhaps a moan. Hargrove did not look away from his count. 5, 6, 7, 8. He replaced the lens cap. He looked up. Eleanor's right hand was gone. Not transparent. Gone. The sleeve of her dress hung empty from the wrist. There was no blood, no wound, no mark of any kind. The hand had simply ceased to be. Thomas Blythe stepped forward. He reached into the empty sleeve, and he felt her hand. He felt her fingers. He felt her grip his own. But there was nothing to see. Nothing at all. Eleanor looked down at her own empty sleeve, and she said very quietly, in a voice that Dr. Cranach described as entirely calm and entirely devastating, "It has finally made up its mind about that part of me." The photograph was developed that evening. It showed exactly what Hargrove had seen. Eleanor, seated, composed, complete in every detail, except for the right hand, which was simply not there. Over the following 9 days, the disappearance accelerated. By the 5th of September, her entire right arm was invisible. By the 7th, the